We got 14 people already in the live stream with 11 likes. Be sure and go and hit that thumbs up button when you join in on the live stream. By doing that, the algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in. Going to be talking about the neutral interest rate. This is one of my favorite topics. It's something that I have been trying to put out there as far as information, talking about the neutral interest rate and the Federal Reserve's position in relation to that neutral interest rate and what that means for the future monetary policy. This is not something that is well discussed out there. Most people have no idea about the neutral interest rate or how it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be conducting themselves in relation to that neutral interest rate. So the neutral interest rate is the rate in which that the Federal Reserve is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. And again, not a lot of people talk about it. I found this great interview talking about the neutral interest rate, discuss some really good ideas of what that neutral interest rate means for monetary policy going forward. But I do believe that the individuals who are in this interview, like the guy who's being interviewed and also the person conducting the interview, are not aware of the credible threat theory and any idea of it. So now when you incorporate the credible threat theory into the neutral interest rate and how it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be conducting themselves, it begins to make a lot more sense on why it is that there is so much inflationary pressure being pushed into the narrative out there of what's going to be coming to the future. Mainly through tariffs, immigration, stuff like that, like deportation or whatever it is that you're thinking out there. These are the inflationary pressures that come to the economy that hasn't got anything to do with like money printing or anything else like that. Like it has everything to do with our expectations, the inflation expectation. Now, let's take it back just a little bit so we can understand what's really happening here, because that communication coming from Donald Trump is actually benefiting the Federal Reserve. I don't know if a lot of people realize this. When Donald Trump comes out and talks about all these tariffs and immigrations and all the other stuff, this has a lot of inflationary expectation attached to it, which then leads to inflation. Inflation expectation is the self-fulfilling prophecy. People start behaving in a way that actually creates the inflationary scenario. Okay, so let's take it back just a little bit and understand the problem that the Federal Reserve was facing. Because the Federal Reserve had communicated back at the end of 2018 that they were facing a major problem with a very low neutral interest rate. That means that neutral interest rate, where the Fed is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, was very close to zero. Now, this was a problem for the Federal Reserve because they had no room for stimulating the economy. When they lower interest rates to zero, they could not get far enough below neutral in order to stimulate the economy. This was a major problem. Now, the problem that they were facing as far as keeping that neutral or having a low neutral interest rate is because the inflation expectation had also fallen dramatically. Now, if you go and listen to that interview, they actually discussed that, saying that for the last 2 decades, we've had a very low inflation expectation, which has created a neutral interest rate that would be very low as well. The higher the inflation expectation, the higher the neutral interest rate will go. So now this is the situation that we are facing today. See, the Federal Reserve was sitting in a position in which that low neutral interest rate left them with very little ammunition for stimulating the economy because they would not be able to lower the Fed funds rate far enough below neutral. However, as the time has gone on and we've had elevated inflation expectations and elevated inflation, it has raised the neutral interest rate. This is where a lot of people begin to get very confused on what it is that the Federal Reserve is attempting to do, because most people look at the Federal Reserve saying, okay, they're trying to combat inflation. They're trying to prevent it from happening. That is not correct. Because most people see it that way, the Federal Reserve is able to conduct themselves the way they are. And this is important to understand because this is the part of the credible threat theory that most economists miss, including the ones who are in the link of the interview that I have shared with you guys. They are missing what has taken place here. They even admit to it that the neutral interest rate has risen and risen quite high. Like a lot of, nobody knows exactly where it's at, right? Even including the people within the interview and myself, nobody knows exactly where neutral is. But there is belief that the neutral interest rate has risen. And there is a lot of talk that it is now close to where the Federal Reserve is today, meaning that the Federal Reserve is at neutral. which would make a lot of sense on why it is that they are going to stall out on the interest rate cuts. See, a lot of people are missing why it is that the Federal Reserve would really be conducting themselves in this fashion. It's because they have achieved neutral. And not like they have achieved neutral. Neutral has achieved them. If you have an elevated inflation expectation due to what it is that Donald Trump has been saying, it will raise the inflation, raise the inflation expectation, raise the neutral interest rate to where it is that the Federal Reserve is today. And that's what the Federal Reserve wanted. They want to be at neutral. So they can sit on their hands, do nothing, and Donald Trump will say, hey, boys, just sit back there for a little bit. Give me the mic. Let me take care of business. Let me see if I can get the inflation expectation to rise. And when that takes place, we'll also have an elevated neutral interest rate. You guys will be right where you want to be, and you won't have to do anything at all. You see how these two are working together? They've done this before in the past, way back before in the first Donald Trump administration, right? The first Trump administration, he was screaming about wanting to fire Jerome Powell so that he should take interest rates into negative territory. There was a reason why he was discussing it in such fashions. He didn't really want the Federal Reserve to take interest rates to zero and go negative. What he was doing at the time was lowering the inflation expectation. He said it at the time. There's no inflation. The Fed should be printing money, going into negative interest rates. Germany's doing it right by having negative rates. This is all stuff that Donald Trump had said in his first administration. He didn't really want that to happen. What he was doing was lowering the inflation expectation. When you lower the inflation expectation, you will raise the real interest rates. And that's what he was really doing at the time, was raising the real interest rates by lowering the inflation expectation. A lot of people will miss that understanding of it too. So let me explain that real quick. If you were an investor, let's just make it simple. If you were an investor who was anticipating a 2% return, but also had a 1% inflation expectation, the real return would be 1%, the real interest rate, what you get after inflation. If you lower the inflation expectation, you will raise the real interest rate to 2% if you lower it to zero. Does that make sense? So as the market would perceive it, if they have a low inflation expectation, that will raise the real interest rate. And again, on the opposite of it, right? If you raise the inflation expectation, you will lower the real interest rate, the rate of return in which that people will get after the investment, what they will get after inflation. So understanding that this communication has a profound impact, not the reality of the situation as far as tariffs and all that other stuff, just the market perception of what has taken place out there. If you can raise that inflation expectation, you will raise the neutral interest rate. If you raise the neutral interest rate, the Federal Reserve doesn't have to move. They don't have to do anything at all. They can sit on their hands and let neutral meet them. They will have achieved their goal, and they didn't have to do anything but change the expectations of the markets out there, and Donald Trump is totally doing it for them. Right? Nobody sees it this way. Most people look at it and say that the Federal Reserve and the Donald Trump are battling, like they're fighting. And this is exactly the communication that they want to put out there so that people would recognize it in that fashion. Tell me, would professional wrestling be nearly as much fun if you realize that all those actors out there on that stage were actually best buddies behind stage? When they're out there in the audience or out there in front of the audience, they want to tear each other's heads off. But in the background, they're all best buddies. The Federal Reserve and Donald Trump are exactly the same way. They're exactly the same way. When you recognize how it is that they use that communication against you, right? Use your own belief about what it is that they are attempting to do, and it's that actual communication that is being used against you. It is straight up gaslighting. There's no other way of describing it. Now, I just took a couple of notes from that interview, and part of it, like they were describing, at 2:40, right? 2 minutes and 40 seconds into that interview, inflation expectation raises the neutral interest rate. They admit it right there, right? And that there's probably going to be higher for longer with that elevated neutral interest rate. And I totally agree with this. This is something that I have said so many times in the past. The Federal Reserve is getting high and staying high, right? When you're high, you never want to come down. I don't know how many videos that I have done talking about this exact thing. And most people are just going to miss it because they think that the Federal Reserve is flying off of the, like, flying on the seat of the pants or whatever, like making snap decisions. It's not. This is a very well orchestrated long-term strategy plan that they are now conducting. There's no other way of really looking at it. Most people think that they are like making this up on the fly. They're not. This has been planned out for a very long time. We have been like documenting this going back to Ben Bernanke's speech given back in 2001. Right? This is not a surprise. This is exactly how it is that they said that they were going to conduct themselves. Once they have achieved, once the Fed funds rate hit that lower bound of zero, and the neutral interest rate was close to zero, their monetary policy was over. It was done. This was back during the great financial crisis. There was talk that the Federal Reserve, in order to conduct themselves the way that they normally would with interest rate adjustments, would have had to take Fed funds rate negative 6.5% during the great financial crisis in order to cause any kind of stimulation to the economy. It wasn't going to happen. There was no way. They said, that's okay. We got other tools. Quantitative easing came out, and that job-owning forward guidance, and the belief that all the money printing was going to create a hyperinflation scenario. I know, I was one of them during that time who was saying that. 2018 rolls around, and there was hardly any inflation at all. The expansion of the balance sheet from $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion did not create the inflationary scenario the Federal Reserve was looking for. They knew they had to change the way they do things. And that's why we are experiencing what we are today. Most economists have no clue about any of this that I have just discussed. None. They talk about the neutral interest rate. They got a grasp of it. They understand what it is. They understand that the Federal Reserve is going to be in a position in which that they are neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, but they are not discussing it the way that the Federal Reserve was discussing their problems that they were facing at the end of 2018, going into 2019. That low neutral interest rate was going to absolutely destroy monetary policy. Everything about the Federal Reserve and how they conduct themselves absolutely desperately needed for their survival elevated inflation. Inflation expectation to be elevated to raise the neutral interest rate. If that did not happen, they would be out of the game. I don't know how many people realize that. Every single person who fell into the inflation expectation that it was going to destroy the monetary policy, that we were going to have a hyperinflation scenario, totally benefited the Federal Reserve. It saved their ass. They needed it. Once you see it, once you recognize it, then you can't unsee it. All these other economists out there are scratching their head going, man, I don't get it, man. I don't understand why they're doing it this way. It's because they don't understand how it is that the Federal Reserve lost their ability to conduct themselves the way they normally did. They don't talk about it. And since they don't see that they had failed, they don't understand why it is that they are now conducting themselves differently. And it's so different from what it is that they had normally expected coming from the Federal Reserve. They just have no clue about what's going on. Somebody like me who didn't learn from an institution or from somebody, from some class or something else out there, but actually had to break down the Federal Reserve's words themselves in order to figure out what was going on, I discovered this strategy, and it's not even hidden. It's like it's plain as day. It's right here in front of everybody, but they don't see it, and I don't know why. It's because they listen to the propagandized information coming from the mainstream media, and then they regurgitate that same information back out to each other. And so everybody just has this belief of what it is that's going on out there that is completely inaccurate. All right, let's get some questions in here, and then we're gonna let's see, 14 minutes into this is good. Okay, imagine still have to paying your mortgage, but your house is gone due to fires. Walrus, it's why investing I do before paying off house. Fed is complete. No one says you have to pay to be mortgage on your burned down house. In fact, you're free to default. The Fed is incentivized to raise rates when inflation employment is high and lowers when employment is low, stimulating or restricting where the neutral rate is their nirvana. Well, I would agree that in that sense that would be very true, but once you have a low neutral interest rate, stimulating the economy is no longer an effective tool through interest rate adjustments. Nobody knows that. Right? Nobody understands that. Nobody sees that, but that's the case. You could take interest rates to zero and it still would not be enough to stimulate the economy. We learned that from the great financial crisis. Now, here's the thing. They started using communication for their monetary policy tool. Forward guidance, signaling, jawboning. The rest of it didn't matter anymore. It was their words that they were using that mattered. And they realized that the more that they conduct themselves using their words, the more it matters. In fact, it means more than anything else. Very little means anything. The interest rate adjustments is not the profound tool as much as the communication about it. And that's important to understand because most people are so focused in on interest rate adjustments as being the main monetary policy tool that they do not see the forward guidance, communication, jawboning, signaling, credible threats, whatever you want to call it. They just don't see that, right? Because they see it, they hear it, but they think about like, okay, so at some point in the future, they're not thinking about this exact moment because of it. When that communication comes out, this is now having an impact, a real impact on the economy. Think about it. At the end of 2023, all the communication about interest rate cuts. How many interest rate cuts were promised at the end of 2023? The mainstream media was pushing out the idea of cutting to zero, 14 rate cuts, 7 rate cuts. I don't even know. It was all this BS that was being pushed out there. But what happened? Before they even had any kind of rate adjustment at all, mortgage rates were coming down significantly. The moment that they cut rates, they shot up. They went the opposite direction. How it is that everybody is focused in on the rate cuts as being the main monetary policy tool is missing it. They are missing it. Right? It's not like it's not real. It's real, right? The interest rate adjustment is real. It's a real thing that happens within the banking system. But to understand that the Federal Reserve is using their words to guide markets. That's important to understand. Most people don't see it that way, right? And they don't understand how it is that those words are literally trying to change the behavior of the people in order to conduct monetary policy. Everybody wants to focus in on interest rate adjustments, like the physical change of the Fed funds rate. All right, Trump is the funniest president we have ever had. I so agree. With that. And, he's quite entertaining in a lot of ways. All right, thanks for your knowledge. Did you ever do a video on the end of the year monetary policy review? It hasn't happened yet. They haven't done that monetary policy review as of yet. It's still the same one that they put out back in August of 2020. That hasn't changed. They reaffirmed it last year, and they're going through the process of figuring out what it is that they are going to change about that long-term policy strategy. But as of this time, they have not come up with a new statement yet. So I haven't done a video on it because nothing has changed. All right. Biden was pretty funny. Yeah, I don't know. I saw some of the jokes that were created, like all the meme jokes and stuff. But I never listened to anything Biden said, so I wouldn't know if he was funny or not. So I wouldn't know. All right. Are you concerned about the record credit card usage delinquency numbers that came out and the possible economic effects? So many Americans surviving on credit right now. Well, the entire United States survives off of credit, right? That's ultimately what we do is we issue out debt to the world and the world sends us their stuff. So, it's like the entire American population lives that way. This is more separation between the rich and the poor, right? You think about it, the problem that we are really going to face going into the future is inequality. It's going to be bad. Even a good job is going to suck for you. And I'm not sure what it is that you're going to do as far as the environment, the economy that we are experiencing, in which that your day job is going to be enough. It's not. I mean, I realized that a long time ago that it was not going to be enough, and that I would have to put out so much more effort in my life in order to acquire some of the things that I feel is going to be like the best position for me in my family, like mainly buying a house, right? This is not something like a lot of people will look at the economy or the administration and say, hey, my good job should be enough. You need to do something about making this environment, this economy, conducive to my good job so that I can buy a house and have a car and a wife and the kids and, you know, the family and all the other stuff that goes along with it. This is the way that most people end up seeing it. This is a very damaging way of looking at it. Because what it will end up doing is putting you in this wishful, hopeful thinking that there's going to be some sort of ability for somebody else out there to come in and change the way things are done so that we don't have this massive inequality taking place. That's not going to, it doesn't work like that. Cantillon effect is it's well in play right now. And so to understand that the only way that we are going to be able to survive going into the future is going to be through debt issuance, printing of money, more new money coming in. The more new money that comes in, the more separation between the rich and the poor we have. And people say, well, that's a bad thing. Having this new money coming in and separating the rich from the poor is a bad thing. I totally agree, right? But what are we going to do? Because if you turn the new money off, everybody falls into poverty and misery. So which one do you want? Like, I'm cool going either way. Like, I keep telling people this, like, I don't care, right? Well, you want to go to a gold standard, you want to end the Fed, you want to keep going, you want whatever you want to do, man, go for it. I don't care. I'm going to be able to position myself in accordance to what it is that I feel is taking place out there. And if you want to go to a gold standard, Bitcoin standard, stay with the Federal Reserve, I do not care. I will position myself appropriately for it. Most people don't see that. What they see is administration that needs to do something that makes their life better. And they are going to fail. They're going to fail following that idea. All right, continuing on. Half my family will be poor just because so terrible with finances. Yeah, and that's the unfortunate situation that most people end up facing. They don't there's so much down talk, like down with capitalism, screw capitalism, bad landlords, blah, 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 all these bad things, right? And then they say government needs to do something about it. And I'm like, you know, this is a very communistic thought. Down with capitalism, down with landlords, and the government needs to do something about my way of life. That's straight up communism. Like, that is begging for socialistic, communistic behavior. The other way to look at it is saying, yeah, man, this is hard. I'm glad I live in a country in which that I am capable of achieving capitalism and property ownership. This is a good thing. And since most people don't look at it as a good thing, they don't participate in capitalism or property ownership, and then they wonder why it is that their life sucks. Right? I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. There's a handful of people out there who are absolutely killing it out there right now, and you look at them, and what are they doing? They're capitalists and they're property owners. Okay, well, I guess I know what I need to do. Right? All right, my old man used to stand around me going, do, 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 do. My favorite book was The Little Engine That Could. All right, deplorable. If we got rid of Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking, that would be capitalism in my way of thinking. Actually, I agree with you. I agree with you on that too, right? It's because you would actually allow for the rise and fall on your own merits. Right? That's actually very true. To actually to have an economy that allows failure to take place. That is very a capitalistic mindset. Yes, I agree. Do more, be more, do more, be more. Middle, low class have the deplorable flu. It doesn't work like that. Okay, you know, I mean, you're right. Do more, be more, all that other stuff, and then you can say it doesn't work like that, and all you're doing is just like, you know, suffering as a slave. That's cool. Go ahead and, I mean, I understand that. Right? I understand that position. Now, in the meantime, I'm going to go bust my ass, do as much as I possibly can to earn that little bit of extra money, whatever the hell extra means, and I'm going to put that towards stocks, bonds, real estate, Bitcoin, all the other assets out there. And hopefully I am positioning myself to separate from the poor. Like I'm creating my own inequality from the rest of I mean, I can't compare myself to people out there who are rich because I don't feel that I'm ever going to achieve that sort of level of things, but I can achieve the level of things that I want in my life, and I can become the capitalistic property owner person myself, and I don't need anybody else's help for that. And I don't need them to change the economy, and I don't need them to change anything about it. I just need to be able to figure out what it is that's going on so that I can position myself accordingly for that. That's it, right? You know, there's nobody's coming to save us. I hope people realize that there is nobody coming to save you. Period. You are it. That's it. You are it. It's not fair and it's not going to be right and none of that stuff. So, you know, just suck it up and deal with it and move on to what it is that you need to do. All right. I'm working 2 jobs and tripled my income of my early 20s. I'm just sharing the sentiment that I hear everywhere nowadays. How about giving the taxpayers stock in the companies and corporations that are being funded by taxpayer dollars instead of Congress and Senate making money off of the taxpayer dollars? How about yellow? What is it? Yellow? Jello? How about just go and participate in the capitalism yourself? Why do you have to have government, like, you know, why do you have to say, oh, my tax dollars should be, you know, used in particular directions? Who cares? Right? You shouldn't be taxed anyway. Right? As far as I'm concerned, it's a fair trade. My time for those dollars. Why is that being taxed? There's no profits and gains there. Right? It's an equal trade. But yet we got to pay taxes on all that stuff. So what they are doing from you is they're taking your time. Well, get your time back by investing back into a dividend paying stock. Right? I mean, just do the opposite. I'm just going to become a politician. Yeah, you can do that too. Yes, daily gratification, have young kids invest as early as possible. Full reserve equals money. Anything less is not money. Let's see here. The lottery must save me, I guess. All right. All Nighter says the defeatist attitude definitely doesn't work. I agree. All right. Let me cruise down here to the bottom. Let's see here. John says, just copy whoever is making money. Brody not here today. Yeah, I guess he's not. I haven't seen him pop up yet. Alrighty guys, 27 minutes into this. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this live stream. This is something that I hope people take into consideration when they start to listen, because this neutral interest rate it's going to be talked about a lot more going into the future, especially when they're talking about monetary policy, because the Federal Reserve doesn't know exactly where neutral is. But if they feel that they are close to neutral, they don't want to pass it. Like, they don't want to go below neutral. That will be stimulating to the economy, or somewhat stimulating to the economy. So this isn't where they want to be. They want to be at neutral. And if, better yet, neutral achieves them and they don't have to do anything at all, I think that's even like more in their benefit. The higher we have an inflation expectation, the more that's going to raise the neutral interest rate. So with the credible threats of tariffs and deportation and all this other stuff that goes on out there, when we think about what it is that's going to do for an inflationary scenario, that elevates the inflation and then elevates the neutral interest rate, and that is the benefit for the Federal Reserve. I don't know how many people look at it that way. Most people don't see it like that, but that's exactly what it is happening. I've done videos on this for the last couple of years talking about raising the neutral interest rate to try and become more in line with what it is that the Federal Reserve has positioned themselves at. Right? And this is what's occurring right now. Remember, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear out there. All the mainstream media is completely propagandized information. I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but it's very much used in a way that allows you to continue to believe in things that may not necessarily be true. Right? It's not lies, but it's not the truth. Much like the idea of a 2% target, right? 2% goal, 2% over time. It's a 2% average inflation rate. It's 2% flexible average inflation targeting. AFAIT, right? All right. I'm sorry, AFIAT. There we go. All right. Asymmetric flexible inflation targeting, average inflation targeting. I can't even say it right. Right? But this is what the Federal Reserve is actually doing with inflation, is that they are trying to have inflation moderately above 2% for some time to raise the neutral interest rate so that they have their Fed funds rate at neutral and they don't have to do anything with their monetary policy other than talk about it. And it works. It works so well. Okay. Thank you guys for being here. Uneducated Economist, 224 people watching. With 72 likes, go hit that like button one more time before we end the live streams. That way the YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to see it. It surprises me, Simon, that with your skills, you also don't start a channel that shows how to build chicken coops, sheds, barns. Your comments on your videos are getting lower. Your comments on your videos are getting lower. Interesting. Okay. I don't know. Like, there's plenty of videos out there on how to build stuff, but like, how many people are actually talking about monetary policy, economics from a working class point of view? Right? Nobody. Like, I mean, there's some people out there that are doing it, but for the most part, everybody that you hear on the internet, everybody you hear on the news, all these other people, they're all flying at 30,000 feet looking down on the economy. I'm the only one who's standing here on the ground, boots on the ground, talking about monetary policy from inside the game. I don't know how many people realize this, but we as working class individuals have information that those people, all those economists and analysts and all those other people, they're waiting for us to live our lives so that they can read the data about it. Do you realize that we have this information in real time? You see how advanced we are with this understanding and this knowledge once we have seen it, that we have it before anybody else does? You know how awesome of a position that is in? Like I said, most people have to wait, right, to read the data, to then make their financial decisions, their investment decisions. We have that information in real time if we can see it. And that is why I do this channel. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.